The annual Minecraft mob vote is back, with 3 new mobs proposed, one of which will get voted into the game. And so, like I did when last year's vote was happening, I'm going to take the 3 options and redesign them into fantasy monsters. I mean, the 3 options this year are a little bit less fantasy creature-like than last year's, but I think this is still going to be a fun excuse to return to this series. So let's get into it, shall we? Let's go!
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
I realized just recently that it had been nearly a year since I last ventured to the mining colony Isles, which has proven to be home to a fascinating ecosystem of creatures and beings that I learn more about upon each visit. Like I did upon my last trip to the Isles, I met up with 2 explorers and beast chroniclers named Lady Agnes and Sir Jens, who, at the moment I found them this time, were working alongside another longtime resident of the Isles, Sir Vu. My timing could not have been better, as they were just about to take off on a sailing journey across the various isles to visit the different terrains these lands have to offer. They were eager to have me join, and so I did. The first place we traveled to was one of the warmest regions of the Isles, a savanna that, in some areas, more so resembled a desert. It had few scattered trees, and some villages were visible at a distance, though we didn't take the time to go and visit them. Instead, we were there to study a creature whose species was just starting to become viable for hunting once again: the Rolling Armordillo. These creatures are a breed of Dire Armadillo that once were hunted to the brink of extinction on the mining colony Isles for their hides. The armored plating that runs along the tops of their heads, backs, tails, and legs is both incredibly durable while also being quite light. The villagers of the Isles would hunt these creatures for both a show of their skills as warriors and protectors to their people, while also seeking to use the creatures' plating to craft armor for their animal partners. Most commonly, the wolves, some in this territory, are known to hunt alongside, but taking down these armored creatures is rarely easy. The Rolling Armordillos are able to curl themselves into a ball, concealing themselves entirely in their protective plating. But on top of this, they are also able to charge at an approaching threat, then curl into a ball after building momentum and speed to roll like a spiked boulder at the hunters coming after them. They also have heavy bone clubs at the ends of their tails that they can swing at their foes to cause lethal bludgeoning damage. Of course, even with their natural defenses, long-term they were not a match for the hunters of the Isles, and, as mentioned, eventually they came to the brink of extinction. Because of this, the surrounding villages agreed for many years to no longer hunt the creatures to allow them to repopulate. But finally, their numbers have grown significantly, and there has been talks of allowing some select hunters to go after them once again. Though, a balance must be struck to ensure that they are not dwindled to threatening numbers once more. Now, I knew this episode was going to be a little bit more of a challenge because this year we really did just get like 3 animals: an armadillo, a crab, and a penguin. There wasn't anything monstery about them like a lot of other Minecraft mobs have, or like we had last year. So I decided to lean into the idea of making all of these like dire versions of the existing animals, or even more hostile versions. I made all of the creatures in this episode not fully hostile mobs / monsters, but I did give them all potential to be hostile. I mean, I leaned fairly heavily into hostile for most of them. So for this one, to make it more monstrous, I, for one, gave it the clubbed tail, which there's nothing actually in the game or in the suggestion of what the armadillo could be in the game that leads us to believe it would have something like that. But for an armored creature like this, I was really thinking something along the lines of an ankylosaurus. So I was like, armored creature, let's give it a clubbed tail, and I just tried to emphasize the creepiness of the face. I looked at actual images of armadillos, obviously, to get more ideas of what they look like in real life, and then also, as I often do with creature episodes, reference some Monster Hunter creature designs to, you know, play around with how the face and mouth is structured, gave it some drooling saliva coming out of its mouth and made its eye like blackened around part of it to just up the creepy menacing factor a little bit more. Added spikes to it that don't necessarily make sense for it being able to roll, but we can just ignore that fact. And overall, even though I found giving a pose to this one a little bit awkward, as I often do with chunky 4-legged creatures, I'm still very pleased with how this one turned out, and I hope you all like it as well. Let's take a look. The next territory I visited with the trio of chroniclers was the mangrove swamps, but I was told we'd all have to be quite careful, as the creature we were seeking was adept at hiding and leaping out at unsuspecting prey. From the description of it, I was skeptical to believe they'd be able to hide from us so easily. Sir Vu stated that these creatures, at full size, stood at 15 feet tall, and were often equally as wide, as well as having a claw that is as large as their bodies. But surely enough, when we finally found the first, I had not seen it until we were within reach of its deadly arm. Once in the swamps, a colossal clawed crab leapt out at us from beneath the murky waters and nearly snatched up Sir Yen's, but he thankfully was able to dive free from harm. For the moment. Unfortunately, as we backed away, another, younger and smaller crab leapt from the tree above and nearly landed on top of me. And then came another, and another. We were soon surrounded, and, while I trusted my allies enough to get us out of the situation, I didn't feel it necessary to take any risks. I used my summoning abilities to call forth the volcanic Cyclops, which I've used in similar dire situations before, and it was able to fend off the largest crab, while Lady Agnes and Sir Yen's fought back the others. We managed to escape without being harmed ourselves, and without harming any of the creatures we'd come to observe too severely. We were more careful after that encounter, and observed the crabs that had come after us from a greater distance. These creatures were also just returning to prominence in these swamps, as their shells and claws too were very useful tools and materials for the villagers of the Isles. They have one massive claw and one more proportionate to their body size, but both can be converted into useful implements for construction. Some have repurposed the claws of smaller crabs to create extended, sturdier arms for themselves, making it easier to hold and transport more dangerous materials, such as heated metals before they have cooled. The meat of these crabs is also a delicacy, which further led to these creatures being overhunted. I must say though, I am quite impressed with the residents of these isles for having the restraint to collectively agree to stop hunting certain creatures when they approach extinction. It helps me to see how these isles have managed to maintain a healthy existence with their surroundings, despite the fact that there are so many dangerous creatures to be found here. As we finished our day observing the crabs and headed off, I can't be certain, but it almost seemed as though the largest of the crabs had spotted us departing and was waving us goodbye. Now this one was easily the most fun to do color-wise because the crab had more to pull from. The design they've pitched for what the mob could look like has blue and white and orange, so I knew that was going to be fun to utilize, and then putting like a purple gradient to blue background in the back to help emphasize the creature, especially the orange on it. I think that all combined looks really nice, and the crab was the first creature that was announced, and as soon as I saw that I got super excited because I really love doing crab and anything with an even insectoid kind of armor or outer shell to it. Those are just really fun for me to do in my art style, and I think look really good in my art style, the way that I color and shade and light. Two of my favorite drawings on the channel still are my Scizor as an SCP from the second episode of Pokemon as SCPs, which is probably the first time I started learning my rendering style for shelled creatures like this, but then also more recently, I think my best example is Kawagamon as an SCP from the first episode of Digimon as SCPs. That is probably going to be in my top 10, if not top 5 favorite drawings of this year. I still really like how this drawing turned out, but like I said, with some of the others in this episode, I was basically just had a regular crab to play with one giant claw. So there were lots of places where I could lean into making it more monstrous. I referenced actual images of crab mouths, which are already pretty weird looking, and then added some sharp teeth to it and some mandibles. But I will say that I think it's kind of funny that I intended to make one claw look massive, and it almost kind of looks like it could be the same size as the other, but I just intentionally pushed the perspective to make it feel like that claw is really coming towards us, which the intention was supposed to be that it was coming towards us a bit, but also that this is a much bigger claw than the others. So maybe I should have emphasized it and made that claw even bigger, like given it an extra 50% to the size I have it now. That also would have helped fill up some of the empty space in this. I feel like the background feels a little bit too empty, but besides that, I do really like how this one turned out, and I hope you all like it as well. Quick reminder that the art from this episode is available as posters on the PopCross Studios Teespring store. Up on there as well are tons of other posters like other Minecraft monsters, ink bundles, shirts, and more. Plus, if you want the high-resolution art and inks from this episode and my other episodes, that always goes up a day before a video is released on the PopCross Studios Patreon. So if you want early access to high-resolution art, that's the best place to get it. All that's linked in the description, but now back into more art. The final creature we sought on the surrounding ocean waters was one that, astoundingly, we found after it had already engaged with a vessel that was very familiar to me. Traveling at unnatural speeds was the ship called the Beauty Maple, headed by one Captain Trenton A. Darrable. At first, I assumed they were moving so quickly as a result of possessing a weapon called the Blade of the Northern Tide, which can control the weather and tides around their ship, something I once helped them acquire. But upon closer inspection, I saw that a creature roughly half the size of the boat had its head pressed against their stern, pushing them forward. I summoned my dragon ally Violet and flew over to them, ready to aid in ridding themselves of the creature, but was promptly told that they'd intentionally attracted it. In Captain Darrable's own words, "No need to get your toque in a tussle there, bud. We were about 3 clicks offshore, but knew there was a village on the water. Didn't want to cause a ruckus for him by making waves with the blade, so we called in the heavy chuck here to give us a right good shove to shore." You see, the creature at their stern was the Dire Propelguin. It's a 20-foot-tall breed of penguin native to the waters around these isles that is occasionally known to be helpful by shoving damaged boats into shore, or simply pushing them rapidly out of dangerous situations. The horns on their heads are well suited for essentially gripping the back of a boat to ensure they can propel it forward with more ease. Of course, they are not exclusively friendly. If threatened, they are more than capable of using their incredible strength, swimming speeds, and aforementioned horns to ram boats and capsize them. The Propelguin's bodies do naturally run hot, but they do not require frigid climates of Antarctic islands as some other penguins do. When needing to cool down, they'll often simply swim to deeper depths of the seas, where the waters are more frigid. They primarily feed on large fish around the mining colony isles, but have been known to attempt to eat humans if near starved or in further efforts to defend themselves from hunters. I gathered this information from both the trio of chroniclers I traveled with, as well as from Captain Darrable's own beast chronicler, whom I have a complicated history with to say the least. Still, both groups were brought together on shore, and we had a pleasant evening sharing tales and information about other creatures to be found on the Isles and beyond. It was a pleasant evening and pleasant overall trip to these lands, upon which I was reminded of how positive an example they can be for my world in terms of tribes of people living in a fair degree of harmony with the creatures that surround them. It was nice after, I think, well over a year bringing back Captain Darrable, even if only for a brief reference. If you don't know who that is and want to know more about him and the character narrating this episode, you might want to check out the Beast Chronicler and the Blade of the Northern Tide episode. Or more recently, I did the Beast Summoner to slay a cursed predator, but that one doesn't have Captain Darrable in it. I still like the idea of doing a sea monster focused episode with him as the narrator, but I'd probably have to add another character in there to narrate with him, because the intensity of his Canadian slang might be a little bit too difficult to understand for some people. Anyway, the penguin here I had a lot of fun with, though it looks like a bit of a blend of both cool and kinda silly, which I figured was probably gonna end up happening. I also emphasized the fur on it a little bit more than, I probably needed to. Penguins, they have fur, but it's very flat and matted, a little bit more like an otter. But because I've been liking my new rendering technique for fur, and it does kind of have a little bit of a wet fur kind of look to it, I decided to just go with that and make most of its body kind of fluffy looking. And this gave me another good excuse to do one of my half in water, half out of water things, because the penguin in the actual video that they released of it to announce it is doing that. Although I definitely don't think this example of it is nearly as good as what's probably still my favorite drawing of this year so far, my mix of Gyarados and the Legaia Cruise in my first episode of Pokemon mixed with Monster Hunter. If you haven't seen that episode and you like my monstery designs in this, I think you'd love that episode. I'll link it in the cards. But also doing this drawing gave me another excuse to do the creepy teeth that penguins have on their tongues and the roofs of their mouths. I think I talked about that / learned that in the when I did Avengers as penguins as my Goofy Christmas episode last year, 2 years ago, whenever it was. But anyway, this was a fun one to do. Looks, like I said, a little bit silly, but I'm still pretty pleased with it overall. If you enjoyed this, I highly recommend checking out my full compilation of all my previous Minecraft Mobs as Fantasy Monsters episodes. It's almost an hour long, and I think there's a ton of cool designs in there. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote that I heard in a compilation of motivational speeches. That's a nice simple one, but I think is just a really good attitude to have that can help you be successful in whatever it is you're trying to do. And that's, if you knock me down today, you're gonna have to do it again the next day, and the next day, and the next day, because I'm going to keep getting back up. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.